Psychology helps you to know why people react the way they do, why they behave the way they do, why they display certain behavior. Now, the psychology of mediation looks at how human thoughts, emotions, behaviors are being shaped in the mediation process. The psychology of mediation is all about understanding why people act the way they do in the conflict and how mediators can guide them towards resolution. These are a few breakdown why psychology of mediation is very important and why mediators utilize it to be able to understand certain behaviors in the mediation process. The psychology of mediation helps mediators to understand human needs in the mediation process. Remember, people in dispute often focuses on the position, what they want, rather than their underlying needs. Why I want this, or why I want that. The psychology of mediation helps mediators to uncover hidden drives such as security, respect, fairness, control, so parties can find solutions that meet their respective needs. Another important aspect of psychology and mediation is it helps mediators to understand the perception and cognitive biases in the mediation in the mediation process. Because conflict distorts perception. People see events through different lenses of blame and mistrust. Examples of common biases in mediation is confirmation bias. You're interpreting facts to support your own view, one's own view. You are attributing errors, you are trying to assume that the other party actions come from intentional behavior rather than circumstances that is making one to perceive certain situation in that way. Another common bias in the mediation is reactive evaluation. You're trying to dismissing good ideas just because they come from the other party's view. This perception built up in the mediation process because of some psychological reasons. And the mediator works very hard to reframe perceptions so parties can hear each other without defensiveness, and that is the power of psychology there. Another important why the psychology of mediation is very important because of emotions in the conflict process. Emotions are very high when it comes to conflict, and parties tend to display strong emotions like anger, fear, judgment, humiliations, etc. Strong emotions that can cloud decision making. In this process, the mediator uses active listening and empathy to validate or lower emotional intensity. Because no matter how parties display strong emotions like anger, frustration, the mediator still needs to remain calm to be able to understand parties. And that is the power of psychology there. Because you help you're making use of psychology to regulate emotions so that to be able to allow parties to move from reactive thinking to problem solving thinking. Another important thing why psychology of mediation is very important is it helps to regulate communication dynamics. because there is a mediation while you're managing the mediation process as a mediator. You are also managing the psychological safety of parties in the mediation, because you're trying to make sure the party feels that they've been heard and they've been respected. And that is essential for productive talks. It's very productive to show that it's essential for productive talks to continue in the process. So at this moment, the mediator manages verbal and non-verbal clues to reduce hostile languages and encourages constructive dialogue. Because the mediation process is being handled by the mediator, and it's very important for mediators to use the parapsychologists to manage this process also. Because the psychology mediation helps the mediator to build trust. Because in mediation, trust is very fragile. In any conflict at all, trust is very fragile, but essential for compromise. Remember, in any conflict, there can be a win-win with that, a little bit of compromise from both parties in dispute. At this moment, the mediator uses transparency, neutrality, confidentiality, consistency to build the trust. Even a small act of cooperation during the mediation process can create a trust spiral. Remember, in psychology of mediation, it helps the mediator to manage his power imbalance. Because in power imbalance in mediation involve differences in social status, financial status, or emotional power. It can affect the mediation outcomes. When power imbalances is not managed properly in the mediation process, where you think the other party is more superior than the other, at the moment, if the mediator doesn't manage that properly, it can even escalate more conflict in the mediation process. That's why psychology provides tools to level the playing ground, such as using private sessions. You're empowering parties in the tech parties to decide the outcome, and you are reframing narratives as a mediator. The power of psychology in the mediation process helps decision making and problem solving. Because under stress, the brain tends to choose weak. The brain tends to react in the defensive way rather than thoughtful reasoning. So the mediator uses psychology at the moment to slow down the process, provide structures, and encourage creative brainstorming and the conflict. The goal is to move from win-loss to a thinking mutual gaining. Because in the mediation process, the mediator is there to guide the process, and using a little bit of psychology can help the mediator understand why parties display these behaviors and try to calm them down. Because in the mediation process, the mediator is at the moment is also studying the parties. In a nutshell, the psychology of mediation is about understanding the minds of parties under conflict, pressure, and creating conditions for clarity, empathy, cooperation in the mediation process. A good mediator is a good communicator, a good strategist, a good psychologist, whether they have formal title or not. Whether they study or not, whether they have a degree on it or not. Every day they study humans in front of them who are in conflict. And that's why every mediator have to study psychology a bit to be able to understand why parties display certain emotions, why they behave the way they do in the conflict. And that will help the mediator also to manage the process in a constructive way. So the psychology of mediation is very important, and it will help both mediator and parties in the conflict to be able to navigate the conflict process in a positive way through the help of psychology.